there was something that came out I want to start with today that came out while I was on vacation, and so I haven't really had an opportunity to respond to it with the full force that I wanted to respond to it, certainly. Our friend Jonathan Cho, who is now an independent journalist in Seattle, he was with Como TV News in Seattle until a disagreement over how he covered a Proud Boys rally in the state capitol. He now is a senior fellow and journalist for Discovery Institute, which is sort of a think tank of mostly conservative ideas. I guess that's how I'd characterize it, in the Seattle area. But Jonathan Cho has really continued the same brand of journalism that he was putting out there while he was with the mainstream media in Seattle. He's covering issues related to homelessness and crime. And most recently, he was on Undivided to share a story that he had worked on involving Seattle's International District community, where hundreds of people, mostly members of Seattle's Asian American community, gathered to protest against a planned homeless complex that's going to be built in their backyard. And their concern is that they felt like they weren't consulted really about it, and that they had a lot of public safety concerns related to a facility that could house up to 500 people who are experiencing homelessness. By any standard, this was and is a legitimate news story, and Jonathan Cho covered it as such.
All they're asking for right now is some input and a moratorium, a pause, so they can discuss it and talk about issues like public safety. What's the plan for that?
So like a good journalist, Jonathan Cho did some follow-up. He spoke to two politicians who have somewhat of a say over this homeless complex. One of them was Bruce Harrell. He confronted him at an unrelated event, and here's how that exchange went.
How come they weren't consulted before you green-lighted this?
Well, that's a leading question, what we call in law, and that's based on facts that are not in evidence, as we say in law. So this is a county project, and I believe they did some amount of outreach and research and talking to communities, and I know that they will continue to do that. So,
is there anything you could do to stop this from coming in? Because that's what they want. They want a moratorium.
So again, it's a county project, and so I'm very confident that they will work with the community, listen to the community, and work with the community, and we'll continue to do that as well.
Now, was Bruce Harrell particularly happy to see Jonathan Cho? Probably not. I mean, Jonathan Cho's style is very in your face, I will admit that. But Bruce Harrell, being the mayor of Seattle, who is presumably not scared of one journalist asking hard questions, manages to answer, not the answer of the century, but at least takes it in stride, makes a joke in the process.
Well, that's a leading question, what we call in law, and that's based on facts that are not in evidence, as we say in law.
Now fast forward, and Jonathan Cho went to a press conference held by King County Executive Dow Constantine. Now the press conference was about the county's youth jail, but it's not uncommon for journalists to ask unrelated questions at a press conference like that, and that is exactly what Jonathan Cho did. Here is what followed.
Executive Constantine, I have a couple questions related to public safety. So basically...
I'm sorry, we'll take any other questions offline. Thank you very much.
Follow up with you.
Mr. Constantine, I'm asking a question about the Chinatown International District. Why are you ignoring me? The vast majority of Chinatown had a rally in Hinghey Park this past weekend, accused you of being racist against the Asian American community. Would you put a temporary moratorium on this project?
I'm glad to have Leo come talk to you about this.
How about you? When are you going to face the Chinatown community?
I'm in the Chinatown community continuously, but...
So why not put a moratorium on this before public input?
You're not actually a journalist. You were fired for promoting the Proud Boys. So we talk with reporters like those in the room, and we're not...
So you're not talking to me anymore and accuse me of promoting the Proud Boys. You're an elected official. Why not put a moratorium on this project and get public input?
First, let's be clear. The question that Jonathan Cho asked is a legitimate question by any journalistic standard about a legitimate news story.
Executive Constantine, I have a couple of questions related to public safety.
But rather than simply answer the question and move on, much like Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell did, King County Executive Dow Constantine needs his female staffers to run block for him, pulling him away from the press conference and then trying to get between him and Jonathan Cho as Jonathan Cho pursued Dow Constantine for answers.
Mr. Constantine, I'm asking A question about the Chinatown International District. Why are you ignoring me?
And as Dow Constantine, someone who wants to be the next governor of the state of Washington, frantically pushed an elevator button to get away from a big, scary journalist, his staffers continued to play interference until Dow Constantine, with cracks in his voice, clearly nervous and flustered at the line of questioning, says this.
So why not put a moratorium on this before public input?
You're not actually a journalist. You were fired for promoting the Proud Boys. So we talk with reporters like those in the room.
You are not a real journalist, he tells Jonathan Cho, as if it is up to politicians to decide who the real journalists are. I would note that the two other journalists who were at the press conference that day didn't work for mainstream news outlets either. They worked for independent publications, Publicola and Converge Media. In fact, Seattle has a rich history of independent news outlets that make up the entire media ecosystem. I mentioned a couple of them there. You could also throw in the Seattle Bike Blog, the South Seattle Emerald, and hell, even The Stranger wouldn't be considered mainstream news, yet politicians fall over themselves trying to get The Stranger's endorsement in Seattle. So what would the difference be between someone like Jonathan Cho, who's working for Discovery Institute as a journalist, and journalists who work for outlets like Publicola, The Stranger, the Seattle Bike Blog, the South Seattle Emerald, all of whom show up at press conferences regularly or reach out to politicians for comment regularly, and there doesn't seem to be a problem at all? Well, the difference is that those independent publications align with Dow Constantine's worldview. Those independent publications push progressive ideas. So the problem isn't that Jonathan Cho is an independent journalist. It's that he's not the right kind of independent journalist. And even Dow Constantine's own staff admitted it.
Your office is not responding to me.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
That's because we are answering journalists' questions.
Yeah, I'm a journalist. I just want to let you know that. I'm a senior fellow.
You are not with a media outlet that is...
I am. It's called fixhomelessness.org.
Now, if this was just a one-off, then maybe an argument could be made that Dow Constantine just really doesn't like Jonathan Cho. The problem is that Dow Constantine has a documented history of dodging hard questions, even when they come from the mainstream media. After all, I was with Fox 13 in Seattle for 7 years, and during that time, I did several segments on the fact that Dow Constantine's office refused to answer hard questions. One of them had to do with an undocumented immigrant who raped a wheelchair-bound woman, then got out of jail and attacked that same woman again. The problem was that King County's sanctuary policies prevented the jail from notifying ICE when the rapist was initially released. If they had, he would have been deported from the country and likely wouldn't have attacked his victim again. But when I asked Dow Constantine's office to defend the sanctuary policies in light of what happened, this is what they did. His director of communications communicated to me, "We don't comment on specific criminal cases because they involve decisions by separately elected officials." Well, isn't that convenient? That was in June of 2019. Fast forward to January of 2020, and I had to track Dow Constantine down at a press conference about battery-powered buses just to ask him about why the county needed yet another tax to fund the homeless response when they couldn't account for all the money they'd spent already.
Yeah, we'll do that after. Yeah. Any questions about battery electric buses?
Again, I had to track Dow Constantine down at a press conference about buses after I got done with my shift on the morning show because his staff wouldn't answer legitimate questions about a very important news story. So again, this is a documented history that Dow Constantine has of refusing to answer hard questions. In this instance, he's just blaming his lack of an answer on Jonathan Cho because it is convenient.
We were fired for promoting the Proud Boys. So we talk with reporters like those in the room.
You know, but the thing is, and this is important, I'm not mad at Dow Constantine. Dow Constantine is doing what politicians like Dow Constantine do. They try to avoid accountability, try to avoid hard questions on their constant climb up the political ladder. After all, this is someone who wants to be governor someday. He doesn't want to have to answer hard questions. My issue is with the media. My issue is with every single mainstream journalist in Seattle who didn't stick up for Jonathan Cho, who didn't say something about Dow Constantine's treatment of Jonathan Cho? Who didn't say something about the fact that Dow Constantine used Jonathan Cho as a scapegoat to avoid answering hard questions?
When are you going to face the Chinatown community?
My problem is with every single journalist in Seattle that lets politicians of their political persuasion off the hook when those politicians attack other journalists who might not align with their politics quite as well.
You're not actually a journalist.
Let me tell those journalists something. Dow Constantine doesn't have respect for you. He doesn't put you up on some special pedestal. He just knows that you're going to let him get away with not answering hard questions. He thinks you're weak. And when you sit back and say nothing, when you don't stand up for Jonathan Cho, all you're doing is proving Dow Constantine right.